Morning and hello. Welcome again to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing. I'm reading from Love Endures All Things, the first book in a trilogy about the 47 years my wife and I were married. And I hope you enjoy what I'm doing here and the stories that I tell. I've had kind of an unusual life. If you get in a hurry and don't want to wait for me to read each chapter, you can go to my webpage, which is curtis-jones-books.squarespace.com, and they have a link that would take you to Amazon where you could acquire these books. Uh, and page, the web page, has some detailed information about each book and what it's about, so it'll give you an idea of what you might want to read. But I think if you start reading these, you're going to get hooked on it and want to know the next chapter and the next chapter. And this site over here is my Facebook page. It's Curtis Jones Author page. It also has connections to take you to those to Amazon, to where the books are located. And my books come in ebook and paperback, and some of them in hardback. I'm working on that part of it. Uh, I will say, if you have Amazon Prime, you could probably read the ebooks for free, and that'd give you a little bit of time. But you might want to buy one anyway so that you could pass it on to the people you love, because the stories are very uh, well written. They're organized. My editor did a wonderful job. Her name is Vicki Meadows, and she's edited all my books, so I'm very thankful for that. So chapter 3 of Love Endures All Things is going home. And this describes what happened immediately after I was discharged from the Navy. It's a little bit longer read, so we'll get started with it. Meeting My Sweetheart is the heading of this portion of the book. It says, when I got home from the Navy, I was 18 years old, still just a kid. I had turned 18 when we were crossing the Atlantic Ocean. I got out of the Navy in December 1966. Mom and Dad had come to meet me several times before I had actually arrived in Modesto. Had only spent 18 months in the Navy when I was discharged from the Navy Air Station in Washington, D.C. I was given an airline ticket and not much else, and I went home to Modesto. That lonesome, empty feeling I had on the ship made me think I was homesick. However, as I sat on the sofa with all the family around me, that seemed strange to me because what I thought I had longed for didn't help me feel any better. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. When I did get home, the taxi ride home from the airport to mom and dad's house was short. When I left for the service, they lived on a peach farm north of town. When I got home, they lived on the outskirts of Modesto. Dad had a small mobile home that was set up in the backyard of the house, and I quickly took up a residence in the trailer house. The house was only 8 foot wide and 45 foot long. Uh, I already introduced you. You don't need to be on the film again. Sorry about that. And 45 foot long. It was one of the older mobile homes from the 50s, but it was in good condition and I was comfortable in it. I quickly set out to find a job and get a car. When I left for the service, I had a 1957 Ford pickup. When I got home, I was broke and destitute. Dad had traded my pickup in. I bought the old truck from Dad, and it was gone now. I still owed him $300. when I left, and he traded it in on a new pickup for himself after my boot camp leave. I had been very upset over the loss of the truck because I had learned about it while I was on board the ship after boot camp. Dad could not wait for payments while I was in boot camp. My pay didn't catch up to me for over a month, so he repossessed it and used it as a trade in. I was not so upset over the truck by this time, and I was overjoyed to be back home and out of the situation I had been in. Dad knew a man that ran a small service station in Modesto, about 3 miles from the house. He took me by to talk to him, and I was hired immediately as the night attendant. I started working at 8 p.m. and I got off at 6 a.m. It was not a bad job, but it paid so little. I made $40 a week. I needed more income than that. When I finally got my own car, I began looking in earnest for a better job. This is where I was working when I met Miss Stephanie. I took her to work with me one night before I found another job. She sat in the office when I pumped gas and washed windshields. While working there, I reconnected with my old friends from high school, Mike Drury and John Skaggs, and were almost like brothers. Them and I were almost like brothers. We were always together. Mike was my oldest friend, and John was a friend I met through Mike. Mike and John were really very different from each other. Mike was very quiet and shy. John was very outgoing and bold. I stood somewhere in between the two of them. I will admit that when I was with them, I became more like John, and Mike became more like me. We moved up a step when we were together. We made a good team, though. John and I would often butt heads because I would not go along with what he suggested. Mike hadn't had his first girlfriend yet, and John had had many by this time. One evening we were sitting around talking. John said he knew a girl who knew many other young women and that we could go see her and get dates for the weekend and go to the movies or something. We all agreed and set out for Turlock in Mike's car. Turlock is where she lived. Mike had a 1960 Impala. It was long and flat with wide windows everywhere. It was like traveling in a tour bus. This was a trip that, unknown to me, would change my life forever. Turlock was only about 20 miles from Modesto. It was a farming town and decades apart in time from Modesto, which was more like a city. On the way to Turlock, John said that he did not want to date this girl because she was too prudish and that she knew other young women that were more generous with their charms. I told John that I would like to take this girl because I did not like to date around and wanted only one girl in my life. So we discussed who would get who, and it was all decided by the time we got to town. John wanted a young woman that this girl knew, and that young woman was not prudish at all, John said. Mike said little about what he wanted, and we left it at that. We got to Turlock at about 6 in the evening. and the whole town was rolled up and put to bed. We went through town and arrived at the girl's house, and John went to the door as Mike and I sat in the car. I looked at the young woman in the light of the setting sun and thought she was just lovely. John returned and said it would be a minute and the young woman would come out. She had agreed to go with us to Modesto to get the other girls, and we would make a night of it. After all, it was Friday night. John introduced us to this girl as his friend Stephanie. We headed back to Modesto with Mike and myself in the front seat and John and Miss Stephanie in the back seat. We went to many houses, and the young women that Miss Stephanie knew would not go with us. After several fruitless visits to houses in Modesto, we went back to my place. Miss Stephanie was the only girl with us, and we all went into the living room of the trailer. And in a few minutes, John asked Miss Stephanie alone, asked to see Miss Stephanie alone in the back room. They were gone about 5 minutes, and Miss Stephanie came back and asked to be taken home, and we agreed. There was uneasiness in the air between John and Stephanie, Miss Stephanie. Now, this might have been an end to the evening, but the trip home was where the lasting effect happened to me. Mike and I were again in the front seat, and John and Miss Stephanie were in the back seat. An argument was evident between John and Miss Stephanie about halfway to Turlock. They each moved to opposite sides of the car. I never heard what was said in the argument, but Miss Stephanie was crying. I asked Mike if he would mind if I crawled over the seat. He gave his consent, and I crawled over the seat and sat between John and Miss Stephanie. And I began to console her. John didn't seem to care one way or the other. But on the trip back to Turlock, Miss Stephanie and I became fast friends. I hoped she had seen me as her rescuer. We would soon be best friends. We were both kind of lonely, and we knew that we each needed the other. Perhaps that is the best way to develop a lasting relationship. The need can outweigh the desires of youth. I walked Miss Stephanie back to her door, and we simply said good night without a kiss, and I arranged to see her next Saturday night, my first truly important date, although I did not know it at the time, the date that I would remember the rest of my life, one that I still hold as a jewel in the recesses of my heart. On the way back to Modesto, John and I talked. He was fine with me and Miss Stephanie dating. There was never so much as a bump from the incident in the relationship between Mike and John and myself. I knew now that I needed a better job since I was dating Miss Stephanie. Dad suggested I try where he worked as a mechanic, which was Campbell's Soup Company. I went over and applied and was hired as a line worker. The pay was nearly double at $65 a week. I was hired on second shift and worked from 4 p.m. till midnight. I worked Monday through Friday. This left Saturday for dating and Sunday for church. I started taking Miss Stephanie to church as a second date on the weekend. That way we could spend Sunday afternoon together. Miss Stephanie and I dated every weekend and as often as I could on holidays. We had been dating for about a month when I brought Miss Stephanie to see my mother and sisters. Dad was always at work. I had always given Mary, my sister, just younger than me, a ride to wherever she wished to go, and she asked for a ride as soon as I got there on this day. I told Miss Stephanie I would be taking Mary to her friend's house and I would be back in just a few minutes. I had not carried Mary around as much as I had after I met Miss Stephanie, and Mary was upset about that. Mary and Mom had decided to show Miss Stephanie a photograph of my favorite cousin, Harriet, and say that she was my future wife. It was meant to be a funny joke, and I think almost all of the girls were in on the prank. When I came back from taking Mary over to the house of and brought her home or back home, it seemed no one was at home there. Then in a flash, Miss Stephanie came out of Mom's house in a fit. She was fit to be tied. She was so angry and she was in tears. She said she didn't even want to see me or talk to me. I had no idea what had happened in the house while I was taking Mary to her friends. She started walking down the road, and I followed in the car for a little while, trying to talk through the window. I finally stopped and ran to catch her and with her as I tried and walked with her as I tried to talk. She asked to be taken home. I did not take Miss Stephanie home, but to the park near my house. We would not take I would not take her home until I knew what had happened while I was gone. Miss Stephanie said that she was treated very kindly. She and my sisters talked with Mom for a little while about what a nice fellow I was and how everybody liked me. Mom then pulled out a picture of my Aunt Helen's daughter, Harriet, who was my age and lived in Oklahoma. Harriet is a lovely girl, and her photograph was very flattering. Harriet is the prettiest cousin I have. Mom asked Miss Stephanie if she thought that the girl in the picture was pretty. Miss Stephanie said she was very pretty. Mom then told Miss Stephanie that this was a picture of my fiance in Oklahoma. We were to be married this summer. That is when Miss Stephanie left the house, and just when I had pulled up in front. Miss Stephanie and I talked for many long hours that day and into the night. We were, let's see, into the night. We came to know each other better than we might have should this thing not have happened. That is when I realized why I had the empty feeling and why it was gone when I was with her. I took Miss Stephanie home and arranged our date for the next Saturday. I did get I did not go home that night, but went to where Dad worked, and I told him to control his wife. If he could not, I would be through with a whole lot of them. Pardon me. I stayed with Mike that night, and the next day I confronted them all for this unkind act of hatefulness. They all said it was just a joke that had gone bad. They had intended to tell her the truth before I got back. Whatever it was, I was angry for a long time. I'm surprised it didn't scare Miss Stephanie off because that is when I started asking her to marry me. What happened with Mom and my sisters would have scared almost any other girl off. Coming from a family with five sisters, I did not think I would ever find a girl I would like. I'm not sure why Miss Stephanie consented to marry me. I think I wore her down and she could not resist any longer. Or maybe she just loved me too. Miss Stephanie was cautious with her charms until we were wed. That may have made me want her the more. Miss Stephanie has always been a charming Southern lady, although she was born in San Francisco and raised in the Central Valley of California. This is proof that the Southern charm exists in other parts of America. On one Saturday morning, we were going to the Sierra Nevada mountains to visit a cave. We came into a small town called Angels Camp, about 10 miles from the old gold mine we wanted to visit. As we came to the center of this beautiful little gold rush town, we were met by a line of motorcycles that went from one sidewalk to the other. They were all coming our direction, and I immediately pulled into a car wash that was to my right, and we looked and we locked the car doors and waited for them to pass. It was the motorcycle club called Hells Angels. They all had vests or jackets with the name on the back in large letters, some with skulls on them. There must have been 400 or 500 of them. They were very scary looking and seemed to be out for trouble. There was 3 or 4 of them that pulled into the car wash and drove around our car 2 or 3 times, sneering at us before they left. I was so scared, I was afraid that Miss Stephanie might see that in me and think the worst of me. Yes, I was worried for me, but I was also worried for Miss Stephanie too. I think we went on to the cave after that, but we were so disturbed we spent little time there and headed back to the valley by another way. They were there for the celebration of the Calaveras County Frog Jump from one of the stories by Mark Twain. It is a big party atmosphere for the whole state, and we wanted to stop on the way home. After this, we didn't want to do that anymore. About 2 months later, we were going to Modesto from Stephanie's house in Turlock, and it had rained about an hour earlier, so the road had some wet spots. I usually went the long way so we could ride around together a little longer. This day was a nice, cool, late spring day, and the clouds had moved out as I came to the corner I wanted to take. The corner was at a 45-degree turn to my left. There was a raised railroad track just before the turn. The stop signs were on the road I wanted to turn on. We did not wear seat belts at that time, and I now understand why we do today. As we began the turn, the road dipped down at an angle because the tracks passed at a 45-degree angle too. So the right side of the road dipped off more quickly than the left side. As we entered the turn, there was a large pool of water on the road and hidden by the small hill for the tracks. We went over the hill and on the back of the er, and the back of the car began to hydroplane in the water and moved the car sideways. The oversized tire I had put on the car then hit the dry pavement and the car turned over, landing on the roof. The car spun around and was facing the opposite direction. I evidently passed out from fear, but Miss Stephanie remained conscious the whole time. Neither one of us was injured because we were lucky and because I was only going 30 to 35 miles an hour to make the curve. I was awakened almost as soon as the car stood still. Miss Stephanie was on her hands and knees and facing the back window. I was on my belly and facing the back window as well, but we were on opposite sides of the car now because I had been driving. Many other cars pulled up and were looking into the car and asking if everyone was all right. We were both fine and crawled out through the back seat window. The car had a wedge shape running from the back window to the front fenders, and the windshield was broken out. Someone had called the California Highway Patrol. Out there, when we were there, we called them chips, as they are, as they were generally called in California. They looked at the accident and decided not to issue me a ticket. He called a wrecker, and the wrecker hauled my car and me and Miss Stephanie to Mom and Dad's house. When we arrived, Dad came running out of the house to tell the wrecker not to take the car. He thought that the wrecker had just hooked onto my car and was trying to take it away. This was a nice little 1963 Tempest, and now the top was mashed down to the dashboard. I later had it pulled into a shop and fixed. I think I turned 2 pages. Had it fixed. Maybe 2 weeks later, I was taking Miss Stephanie home from the drive-in movie. She had we had Miss Stephanie's little sister in the car because we had to take her on every evening date we had. Miss Stephanie was the family babysitter. We only knew about two children in her family. We only knew about two children in her family at that time. The oldest was Miss Stephanie, and the baby was her little sister Lizard, or more formally known as Elizabeth, who was 7 at the time. On the way home, we passed a cemetery, and I said that there was ghosts in there, and Lizard said, "Let's drive through and scare Miss Stephanie." And I agreed, and we pulled into the cemetery at 12:30 a.m. and were immediately surrounded by police cars. They separated the girls and me and began to question us. Seems that someone had disturbed many tombstones, and we suddenly became the prime suspects. After questioning us about an hour and a half, we were released. I had a drive in speaker in the back seat with a wire hanging out of the door of my mom's station wagon, which I was driving, because my car was still in the shop. I took the girls home, and the next morning I told Dad what had happened, and he suggested that I go and make restitution to the drive in owner. And I did this on Sunday night and was told I had to pay $55 for the speaker, which took about 3 weeks to make up. I paid $20 a week. I got it paid, and a month later, I was arrested at 3 in the morning by a county sheriff who came knocking at Mom's door, and she brought him to the trailer house. I spent about 3 hours in jail, and Dad bonded me out. That is when I learned I had been arrested for the drive in speaker incident. The DA pressed charges, not the drive-in owner. The case was dropped in court and nothing else was ever done about it. I had been photographed and arrested, and an arrest record had been generated. This is about the time that Miss Stephanie came to me with tears in her eyes and made a confession that she thought would end the relationship forever. She confessed that she was 14 years old and I was 18 years old. I had become so much in love with her by this time, I would have married her even if she was had been 12 years old. I don't know if I'd have done that now, but Miss Stephanie was matured past her years, both in physical sense and in emotional sense. Miss Stephanie had to take care of everything while her mother spent many weekends in jail for something to do with a hot check. Miss Stephanie and I developed a great bond and an interesting history in our short courtship. She and I dated from January 1966 until June 23rd, 1966. We married on a Saturday afternoon at a Methodist preacher's house. Mom and Dad were there with my sister Mary. Also present was my friend Mike, Miss Stephanie's mom, and Miss Stephanie's sister Lizard. Mike was my best man. Mary, my sister, was Miss Stephanie's bridesmaid. The whole ceremony took about 7 minutes, and I never ordered a marriage certificate from the state of California, but I do have the signed application with the minister's signature. We received our marriage certificate many years later. Uh, After about 6 months of dating, Miss Stephanie became Mrs. Curtis Lee Jones. Freedom was replaced with an overwhelming joy and excitement. We could now live together like I had dreamed. Oh, this was going to be great, greater than I had imagined. That empty feeling was completely gone, and I was healed, and my heart was whole. All of a sudden, I was ready for the wedding night to begin. Oh, how lovely this was going to be. Oh, how lovely this was going to be. I just couldn't wait. My heart was racing, and my excitement caused my temples to pulse, and I could even feel them. My stomach had little knots, and my legs even felt weak. We were in the preacher's house, and we were going to dinner with Miss Stephanie's mother later. It was still 2 or 3 hours before we reached the highlight of the wedding night. It was hard to eat dinner because my mind raced to the climax of that day. Finally, the day was winding down and the evening was about to start. Oh, how numb I began to feel thinking about that moment. I could hold Miss Stephanie in my arms and be as Adam and Eve in the garden in all our glory. We entered the house I had, and I carried Miss Stephanie over the threshold as we as was the custom. This was the this was to consummate the beginning of what is now our home. I was hoping that this night might never end because of the expected bliss. We were a little clumsy and we separated to prepare for the wedding bed. I thought I was irresistible in my silky boxers as I lay on the bed as sexy as I knew how. What a picture I would have made for her. She had never seen me like this before. Miss Stephanie went to the bathroom. I was sure it was to put on an alluring and sexy transparent piece of cloth. I waited with bated breath. I heard the bathroom door and I let out a breath I had held for so long. Miss Stephanie was wearing a lovely piece of lingerie, but it was not revealing and it did not meet my wedding night expectations. It was less than revealing. It was quite a granny gown, but it wasn't what I had hoped for. But that's okay. This is, after all, our wedding night. We lay down next to each other with our nerves tingling as we each waited for the other to launch the activities. We waited a long time, or so it seemed. I finally made the first move and we kissed. I said, I had waited so long for this night and could hardly wait any longer. Miss Stephanie said to me at that moment, I'm sorry, but you will have to wait 4 more days to find that moment you're looking for. She said, this is why I wanted to wait until next week. I knew what she was talking about. You see, I have 5 sisters. Oh, how we disappoint ourselves when we fail to plan. Let that be a lesson to everyone that is in a hurry out there. Plan ahead. Thank you for the time you spent with me today. The next chapter I will present is Chapter 4, Wedded Bliss. I think you'll enjoy this one. Everything has its drawbacks, don't it? And God bless us. We have to learn to deal with them. Thank you for your time. If you get in a hurry, you could go to my webpage, curtis-jones-books.squarespace.com, and there's a link there to take you straight to Amazon where you can get these books. And if you get them in ebook, you'll have it downloaded that day and you'll know the answer before I present the next one of these. May God bless and keep you until we see each other next time. Take care.